Hello, everyone. I am really excited to share this part 2 of the interview that I got to do with Joel Dallow from the Cello Sherpa. Lots of incredible insights that he is going to share, things he has learned along his way to becoming a cellist, to becoming a professional cellist and a professional cellist there in the Atlanta Symphony, just stuff that everybody needs to hear over and over again. And I also want to tell you that I was lucky enough to be on his program, the Cello Sherpa, where he is the host and the creator. And it's just a great conversation. Please check that out wherever you get your podcast. It's at the Cello Sherpa. And here's a little sneak peek, a snippet of that conversation I had with Joel before we get into the interview that I did before we hear from Joel. Thanks so much. I saw a student at our All Suburban festival, and he came up to me and he said, "Hey, are you the guy with the YouTube channel?" I said, "Yeah." And he had watched one of my videos about the excerpts, whatever the excerpts were that year for All Suburban, and said it had helped him get in. And that's why it's worth it. That's why it's worth it. That is the whole point, is, students going out there and finding this stuff on their own, and using it to help improve their playing. One more question here. Maybe. One more. And this has come up here a couple of times. It came up when I was interviewing a colleague, and it actually came up at a documentary screening, actually, where Yo-Yo Ma was playing. It was actually a conversation with Yo-Yo Ma and his son, and Nicholas Ma. And Nicholas was there on stage, and it was part of the documentary, and it was a great quote. He said, "We have a terrible relationship with discomfort, that we try to either whitewash things or avoid discomfort." And that could be, physical discomfort, of course. I think when it comes to cello and practicing, though, what's on my mind is kind of more of the emotional, psychological, disclaimer, Joel and I are not professional psychologists. For anyone listening out there, we're just cellists with lots and lots of experience. But when you're sitting there in the practice room for hours and hours, like you and I have done, and the wash comes over you of, "Oh, I don't know this," or, "Oh man, this is going to take another 4 hours of doing this," and just the strain and discomfort of not knowing something and what you have to go through to know it. What advice do you give to, aspiring cellists to push through that discomfort of the unknown, of the unknowing, and just what comes over you sometimes when you realize just how much you don't know?
There is so much to learn that you could spend your entire life learning, and you will never learn everything there is to learn. There is no arrival in the cello. There's no point where you say, "This is it. I'm here. I'm fully formed. I'm as good as I'm going to get." There might be a point where you look back and say, "That was as good as I ever was." But that's a different as the body starts to break down. But I think, from a level of discomfort that you're talking about when it comes to not knowing enough or not feeling like you know enough, I think that you have to find a way to let go of that and realize that none of us know enough. We're all still working. We're all still learning. We're all still learning new pieces. We're all still doing some things for the first time. I mean, I've played in an orchestra for 25 years now, and there's still music that comes across that I haven't played before, especially with modern pieces, but there's even some standard repertoire that I haven't played before. So I think it's being willing to embrace the unknown and recognizing that we're all in the same boat. Somebody might know what you don't know, but that doesn't mean they know something else that you don't know. So it's definitely, I think that's probably the starting point, is to give yourself a pass on the fact that you're never going to know everything anyway, and you're never going to arrive at that place where you're finished. I'm sure that Yo-Yo Ma does not think that he's done learning and that he's arrived and that he's as good as he's ever going to be. He's just constantly wants to learn more. And he has this this insatiable curiosity. And I think the more curiosity that you have in everything, the more interesting life can be. And I think the more interesting music can be too, because it will continue to push you to listen for and work towards learning different things.
So
Yeah. And I also think when it comes to physical discomfort, again, which a lot of my colleagues suffer from, there is some shame in talking about that too. That does. I'm pretty open about it because I don't think there should be shame around it. I think that what we do for a living is extremely physically demanding, especially for string players, because when you play in a professional orchestra, you are playing pretty much every note of every piece.
Right.
And it's very demanding on the body. But I think if you consider the other string instruments, you consider the cello where we're sitting and the end pin is in the ground and we have gravity sort of helping us, then you think about what it's like to hold a violin or viola out here. You know, you're holding it. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So it's weird with the camera reversed, but you're holding, you're holding your arm all the way out at the side of your body. The instrument is here. That is just it's not natural. And I think that that's really difficult from a physical standpoint. And then let's take the bass. The bass's fingerboard is 4 feet long. So there's the physical discomfort of trying to find the note, let alone playing in tune and get your body around the instrument. I mean, so I think as cellists, we have it pretty good when it comes to the physical discomfort. Although sitting, as they say, sitting is the new smoking. It's not a great spend lots of hours sitting, and it does contribute to back problems. But making sure that you're supporting your low back and that your feet are flat on the floor and that you're sitting on a chair that properly supports your low back is really important too. And the last thing I would say about that is I think there's also an unhealthy relationship with perfectionism, with people really trying to aim for something that's so-called perfect. But again, it's just like we never arrive at this finished place. Perfectionism is unattainable also. So I think that what we try and do to push through that is to push ourselves to play at the highest level that we're capable of every day. And the more, and thinking not just short term, like what can I accomplish today that's going to make me better, but how can I accomplish something that's going to make me better 6 months, a year from now? And I think the beauty of playing an instrument, of any instrument, even if you have no plan on becoming a professional musician, is that it teaches you the most valuable lessons in life, which is how do you plan for things? If you have a giant project due in your workplace, in school, you can't do it the night before. You can't learn an entire concerto the night before and have it memorized. Right. I mean, there might be somebody that can, but I certainly can't. And I don't know too many people that can. So that learning how to short range plan to tomorrow or to looking ahead months and years ahead in how you're going to plan and get better is something that benefits us all, no matter what it is that we do.
You just made me realize something really important. And I never realized it before, that some of this, because you mentioned, there's no arrival point. We're never done, but yet we're trying to get ready for stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Or we did an audition and we got told no. So somebody made it to the arrival point. It just wasn't us. And so we have to take that back to the practice room. And I think, like, how do you stay focused after that big no? Because that's where that's a big part of that wash of shame that comes over us. Like, why didn't I make it? Or what could I have done differently? Or how do you stop thinking? It's so hard to stop thinking about what other people have accomplished and just keep pressing forward with what you're trying to do. I
think that's one of the hardest things about being a professional musician is that, let's just take again, the world that I know is orchestra world. I took 5 years worth of auditions, about 25 auditions before I landed the job that I have today. There were many times in there where I wanted to give up and quit because it was very demoralizing and frustrating. But what I realized is that you can learn something. You learn from every process that you go through. You learn from failure. if you don't fail, you never learn anything. The most important thing in life is failing. And the second most important thing, being a professional musician, is learning how to take rejection. Because there's going to be way more rejection if you're trying to get an orchestra job than anything else until there's one person or one committee that says yes. And then it doesn't matter about all the other rejection that happened before. So what I learned is that I would take an audition and spend months preparing for it. And it's really difficult because I would be practicing for 5 hours a day. And in my experience, I was doing this with little kids. So it was an extra challenge, but it also was an extra motivation. So wanted to make sure there was food on the table. And I learned that when you don't succeed at something and you come back from that experience, give yourself a little bit of time to lick your wounds and wallow in some self-pity. Not very long, a couple days maybe. Then pick yourself back up and think about what you could do better. And sometimes the way to think about what you can do better, sometimes it's obvious. Well, I wasn't prepared enough. I flubbed this. I messed that up. You don't always know why, but sometimes you just didn't have a good day. Right. It can be more frustrating in some ways if you had a great day and things didn't work out, but at the same time, at least you can control what you can control. If you play the best that you can and you're not what they're looking for that day, well, so be it. You can't control that. All you can ever do is aim for you being your best. And if you take that opportunity to continue to push yourself to get better and better, it will click one day. Now, the other thing that I've learned from that is that if you can get feedback from the committee, that can be super helpful. A lot of committees won't give feedback anymore because it's very time consuming. I mean, I've been guilty of that myself. If we listen to 100 people, I don't necessarily want to give all of my chicken scratch notes over to someone else. Right. Because sometimes you just write a few little things and it won't necessarily be very helpful. Right. It's enough for me to make up my own mind. So if you can get the feedback, that can be really helpful to understanding what you can do better, or have the opportunity to play for people in the business, either maybe in that orchestra that it didn't go well or other orchestras, and really be honest with yourself about what it is that you're doing. So there's nothing more vulnerable feeling than putting yourself out there and doing the best that you can and having it not come back the way you want. Right. But at the end of the day, you can only control what you can do. So if you do the best that you can do and you keep pushing for that, that's what really kept me going in the end. Because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There were several years there where I thought about, well, what else can I do for a living? Because this isn't going the way that I want it to. And my goal was to have a full-time orchestra job so that I had something I could depend on. So, and people's goals are different. So it depends. Some people are just taking auditions to get the experience to make them better. There's no better way to make yourself better than by putting yourself out there and experiencing that. That will make you better. You have to work really hard. You have to work towards a specific goal. You are going to get better no matter what if you put the time in. And as you continue to get better down that road, hopefully whatever opportunity is that you are aiming for, those doors will start to open for you. Maybe it means that you didn't get out of the preliminary round in a bunch of auditions. So what's a measure of success? Getting yourself out of that first round, starting there. Okay, so maybe then you start to make the semifinal round. And then the next measure of success is, can I get myself into the finals? And then get yourself narrowed down to a handful of people. And once you start getting to a place where you're knocking on that door and you're making the finals more consistently, you're at least doing the right things. And that is what motivation comes from to keep driving forward. I had my second audition. I was runner-up for a 1-year position in the Milwaukee Symphony. The irony of that is that the person who got that job was playing the same cello as me at the time. We both had the same maker. So they clearly liked something about the sound we were getting. And then my oldest child was born. And I did not advance in a single audition for the next 18 months. And so I went from not really understanding how I came so close to not really understanding why I wasn't getting anywhere. And I really had to figure that out and really learn what I needed to do then. If I had gotten that 1-year position, I don't know that it would have helped me because I didn't learn what I needed to through that process to know what I needed to do better so that I could continue to advance in the profession. But again, failure is the most important way to learn anything, and that applies to everything we do in life. Wow. Make a mistake, pick yourself up, learn from it, and do better.
That is $1 million advice out there for all of you watching and listening. And something else that you mentioned that you reminded me of, because it's been so long now after having a job for 10 years, you mentioned going and playing for other people in the industry and surrounding yourself with knowledgeable people. Whatever you're doing out there with music or anything, you can't come back and sit in a vacuum and expect things to change. You got to get out there and keep talking to people and keep asking and playing for other people and figuring it out, like you said, figuring out what's going to make it happen in the future. That's just, it's really good to be reminded.
Yeah. And it's great you brought that up because I would never have gotten to where I am without so many people along the way that were willing to help me, that had their own experiences and that I played for over and over again. And a huge number of people that pushed me, picked at me, criticized me, and told me what I needed to do to have more success. And you have to rely on the people that know what it takes to be successful. You can't do it by yourself. Some people have beginner's luck and they walk right in and do well, but that's not many.
Yeah, I am not in that camp. I am not in that camp. Yeah, I think I went on 15, I lost count. I think it was 15 or 20 interviews over 3 years here in the St. Louis area for string orchestra teacher positions.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was about to give up. And then I got the call. I got the call from the person. Every area has the person, and this person called me, and it's like, you knew, it's like, okay, all right. Yeah. This is the one we've been waiting for. So
such a good feeling happens.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I was going to ask you, I just had a senior graduate from the studio, and we were trying to navigate this land of being a non-major and going to a university and wondering what she should do, because she wanted to. Actually, she ended up not doing the audition. She decided her freshman year was just going to be too crazy there at Indiana, but she's gonna try for the all-campus orchestra, which is a little less intimidating and not one of the audition groups. But what do you do when you're trying to contact teachers or find out about these different groups? Is there a best practices there when going as a non-major?
Okay, so the non-major answer is a little more outside my wheelhouse.
Oh, okay.
I just sent one of my students, just graduated, and she's going to a school and wants to participate but is a non-major. I think it's more important to know what is the school offering for non-majors. Okay. So this student that you're talking about, and I want to talk too about majors, what I think they should do when it comes to finding a teacher, but let's start with this scenario. What is the situation at this school where your student is when it comes to non-majors? Is there a teacher or a graduate assistant that is teaching lessons for the students that are non-majors?
That we never found out. What we found out was that you can audition. You can be in one of the auditions. They have like 9 auditioned groups there. Okay. Between all the symphony orchestras and maybe there's a string orchestra, there's like a early music, ensemble. It's Jacob's school, so there's a lot going on there. There's chamber ensembles. As far as lessons, there was nothing. We never found out what the options were there. I assume you could take lessons, but it wasn't. Who it would be with. I guess it would just be luck of the draw.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of teachers will have graduate assistants that are going to teach non-majors. Some of the teachers that are on faculty will also teach non-majors, depending on what school you're in, and then you can pay extra to get those lessons. So it's more dependent upon that. I think the advantage of being at a school like IU Jacobs is that there are so many people there, and there's probably 60 cello students there already just within the orchestras. So the opportunity to pull someone aside that might be able to help you along the way must be there too. Of course, I probably would go for a grad student who has a little more experience, but there must be something in place if your student were to go to the faculty that were there and ask them, hey, who can I take lessons with? There must be somebody that's allotted for the non-majors.
Right.
So what I was going to say is, in regards to being a music major, it's a similar thing. You have to figure out, well, where do I want to go to school? Who do I want to study with? And how are you going to open up those doors? And my recommendation, what I always do with my students, and this has been confirmed for me with many of the auditions that I've done, or many of the interviews that I've done, because I talk to a lot of college professors on the podcast, and I ask all of them, do you do trial lessons? And I have yet to find one that says no. So I think the advantage that we have, not only that since the pandemic started, we have this digital age where it's acceptable to do things online, but this is a great opportunity where if you don't want to fly all over the country and play for all the different potential faculty that you could study with, there's the virtual option too. So I would recommend to people, if they're serious about pursuing music, is by their junior year to start to figure out where they're interested in going, what teachers they're interested in studying with, and then reach out to them by email, text. Usually you can email a college professor just off the website from their university or conservatory where they teach, and tell them you're interested in a trial lesson. And this is not just for the teacher to hear the student, it's also for the student to decide if this is somebody that they would be interested in studying with for 4 years, because that's a really big decision. And there's no way that you can make that decision on either side. A teacher cannot get all of the information that they need in a 10 to 15 minute audition. If they're even that long, it's not really possible. But if you, as a junior, go and play for these teachers that you're interested in, and then come back 6, 12 months later, either play for that person again or take the audition, it's a good opportunity to show what kind of growth you can experience over a 6 to 12 month period. Because I think here's another myth. I think a lot of people think that when they take an audition somewhere that they only choose the best players. And again, who's best is subjective.
Right.
But if you're a college professor and you want to work with somebody, do you want somebody who's already doing everything perfectly, or do you want somebody who you can help to attain things really high level? And of course, perfection is not attainable either, so I shouldn't even use that word perfectly. Right. But I think that what's more important, and what I've seen teachers like to see, is that not only do they see some growth over a 6 to 12 month period, but that maybe some of the things that they might have talked to you about in a lesson, if you're playing that piece for the audition, that you took some of the ideas that they suggested, and that not only are you receptive in a lesson, but that you were receptive enough to try and push some of those things into the audition. So I think the trial lesson for college level teachers is incredibly important. The other thing you can do is, if you really know you want to go into music starting even earlier, potentially, you have the opportunity to go to summer festivals, and you can look around the country and find summer festivals where people are teaching that you might be interested in going to college to study with. And if you have 3 to 6 to 8 lessons with a teacher over the summer that you're interested in studying with in college, it's going to be a pretty good indicator as to whether that's someone you want to work with for 4 years.
Wow. Yeah, I was listening the other day to a recent episode that you put out, and I'm going to forget the name now, but he was saying actually that trial lesson is the audition. I mean, he just puts it out there point blank that that's the audition.
That's Jason Calloway, he's in the Amernay String Quartet. That's who said that. And he said basically he's been able to create the audition to be that, because he said, I can't get the information I need in a 10-minute audition, so why not do it? It's almost, he said, I think he described it as more old school, that's the way that it used to be. But some schools will let you do that, but other schools Other schools, you don't even necessarily have a say in who's going to go into your studio. Sometimes it's a committee that makes that decision for you. There are some teachers that just get students placed in their studio. So having some sort of previous interaction with a teacher can be gold when it comes to determining whether that's the right person on both sides. Again, whether you want to teach that person as a teacher or whether you want to study with that person as a student, because not every teacher is the right fit for every student, as I'm sure you know with all your teaching experience also.
Yes, having taught many across the years here. Yeah. What, you've taught a lot of students here. What are your top pieces of cello practice advice? You could answer this a number of ways, or what are some of the pitfalls that you see that hinder students' progress? You could go either direction with that. What advice can you give the audience here when it comes to practicing?
That's another great question. The first thing, and I would say the top 3 things are: do your scales. Do not skip your scales ever. That's my theme. And I have an interview coming up in a couple weeks about a scale book. So a new scale book that just came out by 2 college professors. Now, the thing I believe is that, well, first of all, let me back up a little bit. When I went through high school and college, I did not have teachers that forced me to do scales. They did tell me to do scales, but if you tell a student to do scales and you don't make it part of some sort of weekly check-in, chances are that student's not going to practice too many scales. So I learned when I started taking auditions that I thought I played really well in tune, but I started getting feedback from some committees that my intonation wasn't strong enough. And I was really shocked because this was really the first time that I had heard this kind of feedback. So I started investigating what I can do, and I found this book by Jan Polsky, which is a cello technique book that's essentially 4 octave scales, and then each key has 3 pages of exercises. So you have scales and arpeggios, and then you do it in thirds, and that means, jumping by thirds to start, but then playing actual thirds and actual 6 and octaves. And it's several pages of this. And I found that by drilling that every day, that my intonation really started to improve in a way that I started having more success in auditions. So I've turned that into sort of the cornerstone of what I do with all my students up to a certain point. And once they finish that book, we don't do it in lessons anymore, but I do recommend other scale books that they can use. So if you were to practice every day, let's say, even if you're not planning on becoming a professional musician, but you hit that benchmark that I was talking about of aiming for 5 days, 45 minutes each time. Let's say you're busy and you only have 10 or 15 minutes. There's nothing more important in my mind than spending that 10 or 15 minutes on the fundamentals. And the fundamentals of scales, I think you will gain more from than doing anything else. So that, I would say, is the number one thing. When it comes to pitfalls, and I think what people struggle with and the kinds of habits that I see that hold people back, I would say the biggest one is practicing everything too fast. People tend to be in a rush to learn something really quickly. So they sort of think, well, if I just play it quickly, then I'll eventually get there. But you will actually learn much faster if you slow things down first and then work methodically with a metronome to get yourself up to a performance tempo. So that, I think, is one of the biggest pitfalls. And I've seen many students over the years who have sort of ignored my advice of practice this slowly, play it slowly, you need to practice this slowly. And sometimes I've seen that go on for years until something finally clicks. And then they start doing it and they realize, they usually come back and say, yeah, you know what, you were right. So I'd say the second pitfall, and this I think also comes down to who people study with and what sort of fundamentals your teacher focuses on. So again, I felt that many of my teachers once I got through, let's say, middle school, got to high school, we spent a lot more time probably on repertoire and some on etudes, proper etudes and that kind of thing. But I think that the second big pitfall is not paying attention to the fundamentals, spending all your time on repertoire. And again, I know how students are. If you don't assign them every week scales, maybe a thumb position book, or if you're not quite there yet, doing position pieces of some kind. Rick Mooney has a whole series of books that are really great. And then doing some Schroeder etudes or Duport etudes or Popper etudes and having that as part of your fundamentals. So those three things together before you even really think about what repertoire you're going to play. I feel that those are almost more important in your developmental years than what piece you're playing. The pieces and repertoire will come along, but they'll come along much faster and much more effectively if you are continuing to shore up all the fundamentals. So remembering to focus on all these things that are important. You need to make sure that your bow is in the right place, that your fingers are curved, that your thumb is in the right place, that you're relaxed when you're playing, that you're not pushing the sound out, but that you're pulling the sound out, that you're using gravity. I mean, all these kinds of things. And I think the third big pitfall I would say is it's really important to take breaks to avoid injury. Now, I struggle a lot with performance injury, and it is a constant challenge for me. So I'm not necessarily the best person to talk about, avoiding injury because I haven't really managed to do it myself. I've managed to sort of work within the construct of what I do and learn how to work in a way that keeps me in less pain. So sometimes none, but sometimes more. So it depends. But I think the biggest thing is, for example, I took a month off from playing. If I come back and I immediately start to try and jump into 2 to 3 hours of practicing a day, that's just a recipe for disaster. Everything's going to hurt. So you have to ramp your way up when you take time off, but you also have to really make sure that you're building in time for breaks. So if you're practicing an hour, I think you should be taking a minimum of 10 to 15 minutes out of every hour that you are taking a break, that you get up and walk around, that you let the blood flow through your arms, that you're just not playing. And I think that for every hour that you do, if you follow that rule, you will be more successful, hopefully, at avoiding pain and injury. And then, of course, the other thing I would say back to where I started this is scales are a great warm-up. They're not just a great warm-up to get the blood flowing and I mean, when I say scales, don't sit down and try and play them in 8th and 16th notes right away. Play long, drawn-out bows, whole note bows, giving yourself a chance to really pull a beautiful sound, giving yourself a chance to make sure your bow is parallel, giving yourself a chance to see when you put the bow between the end of the fingerboard and the bridge, what different kinds of effects you can get, how fast you can pull the bow, how slow you can pull the bow, what kind of volume you can get, what kind of color you can get. Thinking about the fact that your first finger is in the bow when you pull across and it's translated from your arm weight into your first finger. Thinking about the left hand, really keeping the fingers curved and really thinking, do I want to use vibrato in a scale? There is no specific rule, but if you can use it some to practice vibrato. Having a vibrato that has some varying of speed and width is also a great tool to have. So I always come back to the scales being able to do these most important fundamental things when you're sitting down with the scales first, before you start trying to put that into your etudes and your repertoire and everything else. It's a little bit easier to do it in scales.
I'm glad you mentioned scales so much because I have a burning question I want to ask you, because we realized in our household that we have a little vocabulary problem, because my wife is, because we all do lots of things, but my wife is what I would call a professional performer, much higher level than me. And we were talking about scales, and I realized that when she says, or somebody like you, that play at a very, very high level, say scales are important, unpack that just a little bit, like, what do you mean? Is that just like a linear, like G3 octave, and I'm just going from G up to G and back down? Or when you say scales, in your mind, are you thinking thirds, sixths, arpeggios, octaves? Like, what's under that umbrella of scales that maybe we're not realizing, because I've always had, I'm better now, but I've had a love-hate relationship with scales. Like,
Yeah.
And it can feel like, what's the point of them if you're not doing some of these other things? So just like what are all the different variations that you mean when you say scales are so important?
Well, that's a great question. So it depends on your level. So let's start with, if I have somebody that comes in that hasn't been playing the cello for very long, the first thing I would do is to have them open up the Klangel book. Klangel Book 1. Klangel Book 1, you have to jump around a little bit, but basically it has 2 octaves and 3 octave scales in it. So the first thing I would do is to make sure that somebody's really solid on playing all the major and minor scales in 2 octaves. And if they're solid at that, then what I might add into that, depending on their level of experience, is add arpeggios to that. So it would be a 2 octave scale, a 2 octave arpeggio, and then the thirds. And the thirds, which I mentioned before, are, where you're jumping a third. So it'd be da dee da dee da.
Okay.
And you would do those in 2 octaves too. So until you have gotten all the major and minor scales, arpeggio, and thirds in 2 octaves, then that's as far as you go. Once you've accomplished that, then the next step in the way that I work with students is to do them all in 3 octaves. Same thing, you're just in building blocks. Now, I have some fingerings I like better than others, but there's lots of different combinations, so you can mix that up a little bit. For example, when you get more advanced on a scale and you get to 3 octaves and you start playing those thirds, my rule is, and this is after you've done all the 2 octave ones, my rule is, once you cross over the next string, you can't go back to the string where you were. So what does that do? That forces the student to start to get more comfortable in second and third positions, because you're not, all of us learn how to play in first position first, and then I'd say an even easier position is fourth, because you're down in the neck of the cello and your thumb is right there. You can find things easily, but it's those middle positions, the second and third positions, that can get really difficult to play well in tune. So why not build them into your scale repertoire? So we do that with the scales. And then once they've done the 3 octaves in that same formula as the 2 octaves, then I go to a book, the one I mentioned before, called Yampolsky. And Yampolsky is 4 octave scales and 4 octave arpeggios, and it's multiple different kinds of arpeggios, not just the starting on the tonic, but there's subdominant arpeggio, there's and then just a dominant arpeggio, and sometimes they'll put the 7th in there. So there's lots of different ways that you can do that. And then you start playing actual thirds, like thirds in chords. And so the way that I do that book is I have, and there's also a lot of thumb position practice in this book when you get up into the 4 octaves. There's thumb position arpeggios to really help you learn the geography and landscape, especially when you're up in thumb position. And then you do the thirds and the sixths and the octaves. And the way that I do it with my students is I have them play the 2 notes individually before they play the third. And then the 2 notes individual on every single one. We do the whole book that way, because it's a great skill to be able to play just in thirds. And thirds are actually a little harder than sixths, because they're farther apart when you cross the string. But it really helps you learn not just to make sure that you have those 2 notes in tune, but when you put them together, are they still in tune? Is the chord still in tune? And this is what really helps train our ear. And you can add to this also when you get into the 3 octaves and the Yampolsky, is by playing with a drone, picking the key that the drone, like, if you're in C major, a C major drone, you can try a drone of C and G. So you have the tonic and the dominant, the first and the fifth of the scale. There's lots of different ways you can play with that to really train your ear. And then for me, what I do is, once my students have gone through all of that and they've finished the Yampolsky, which does happen, not for everybody, but sometimes, then I switch more to repertoire and etudes, although we're doing all of that along the way. But then that's when I say, okay, you've done my scale routine. Now, don't stop doing scales, because you know how much this benefits you. Keep doing it, but you don't have to do it in your lesson every week. And I recommend one other book that I really like is Klangel Book 2. And just sort of more variations on scales, and has other types of patterns that you can do, and you can try different fingering patterns. just to mix it up a little bit. So I do a lot of that too when I'm just bringing it back. And I honestly play scales every day. I never sit down at the cello without doing at least, 5 or 10 minutes of scales. Sometimes just playing through some major scales. Whenever I walk out on stage, I try and be out on stage 10, 15 minutes early so that I can go through all the scales, at least all the major scales, maybe some minor, just to get the blood flowing, get my hands relaxed. And it makes a difference. I've noticed when I don't, things hurt more.
Yeah, they get us in touch with the instrument, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Big time. And quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Absolutely.
And fast. I think the key word there that you said is routine. I think everyone needs to remember that scales, we're talking about scales, it's not a one-off linear this note to that note and you're done. It's a combination. It's a group of stuff that you have to get under your fingers for it to be meaningful. Yeah. Yeah. To really get out of scales what you're supposed to get out of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I wouldn't say it's fun, but it's like eating your vegetables. Yeah. Not everybody likes vegetables, but they're really important for your health and they make you better.
Yes. Yes.
Same with scales.
Well, thank you for being so generous with your time. It's just amazing. And I selfishly like doing these things so that I can learn more for myself. Of course, I share them on YouTube, but they're really for me.
Well, I really appreciate you inviting me on, and it's great to talk about all of this. And
where can people find you on social media? Where are you out there on the internets that people can find you?
The first place to start is to visit my website, which is thecellosherpa.com, just like the podcast. You can find the podcast, The Cello Sherpa, on Apple, Spotify, and pretty much all the major podcast platforms. There's also on the website, there's a podcast player. That's one place to find that. There's more information about me, about my teaching, and a few other things on there. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, and I have a YouTube channel with about 12 followers at this point. And I think TikTok, I might have like 30 followers. So I'm just sort of throwing it all out there and seeing what happens. But yeah, those are all the social media places that I hang out to. And it's pretty much all podcast related content on all of those.
Oh, fantastic. And we will link all these things up down in the description so that you can connect with Joel. Yes, go listen to the podcast. Go find him wherever you get your social media, but for sure, listen to the podcast. It is an incredible, wonderful information for you out there. And well, Joel, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your experience and wisdom with all of our audience. Any parting words?
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Most welcome. Most welcome. Well, we will see you next time and hopefully we'll have you here again. Thank you. And thank you all out there for watching.